In an online class, you can't trust a word that anyone says ever again.
So, Graham Hillard, I discovered you by reading an article that you wrote in the Washington Examiner, which was titled In Praise of Errors. ChatGPT is scrambling campus values. And in reading your profile, your bio, it seemed like you were an actual professor of English for 15 years, a decade and a half. You've written books. I mean, you're like this creative writer. What was it like to actually teach before ChatGPT and then teach English after ChatGPT? What is your experience like?
Yeah, so by the time ChatGPT came along, I'd already stepped out of the classroom, from my full-time position, but I still pick up a class from time to time in person, but mostly online. And I can tell you that the difference is really night and day. In an online class, you can't trust a word that anyone says basically ever again. And in fact, if the experience that the University of California community college system had recently is any illustration, you can't even trust that the person to whom you're speaking is a human being, because of course AI bots have become soldiers in the student financial aid fraud army. So there's that as well. I would say that the number one difference is that the way that professors understand nuances, discrepancies, errors in student prose has changed dramatically. And of course, I talk about this in my piece, and we can get more into that in a moment.
So how long did you teach at the university? It seemed, was that 15 years, correct?
Yeah, 15 years. That's right.
Right. And then were you teaching in Tennessee?
Yes, I was teaching at a liberal arts college in Nashville.
Yeah, so you taught for 15 years, and then so you're full time. So you kind of were part time during the pandemic, and then now you've kind of trickled out of it, right?
Yeah, so I was full time during the pandemic, and so could tell all of the usual horror stories about semesters getting shortened and trying to teach classes via Zoom with everyone's cameras off for the most part, trying to figure out, all that stuff. And professors in your audience are nodding their heads right now. It was not a good time. And then in May of 2022, I went to work for my current employer, which is a higher ed policy think tank in North Carolina.
It's interesting because, I have a podcast, so I get bombarded constantly with emails from people wanting to go on the podcast. Usually it's some marketing whoever, and it's just like, oh, I have this, my client is this, and it's this like long, lengthy email that no person would actually sit down and write. As soon as you read it, it's obviously AI. But it's interesting because you were teaching before AI came out, or before chat came out, and then after. So, I imagine you must have like students that were like D writers, and then like a week later, they're like writing this polished draft. I mean, you're kind of like in the transition. I mean, did you experience that? You're like, oh my God, like Bob before couldn't even he didn't even have basic grammar. Now he's writing some concise, polished paper.
Absolutely. And I think that, as this becomes more and more enmeshed in the fabric of higher education, you're going to see this dichotomy begin to emerge. And that is, what do professors know and what can they do about it? Now, obviously, I can't prove this, but I would argue that both as an occasional teacher still and as an editor, certainly, I can tell with 100% certainty whether something is machine generated. Now, I know everybody who stands to make a fortune in AI is shaking their fist right now thinking he can't tell. I swear I can tell. The question is, are university administrators going to allow professors to act on that knowledge? Especially because the chatbot prose creators will always be one step ahead of the ChatGPT AI prose detectors, right? And so my sense is that we're entering a kind of arms race in which students learn new ways to cheat. Professors know it's happening but can't quite prove it, and administrators are left to try to sort it out. I will tell you, from my perspective in the classroom, I want the student who is not sophisticated enough to cheat well. I want the student who says, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT for this prompt, and then I'm not even going to read over what it says. I'm just going to submit it, because that will often come with errors that are so obvious. I'll give you an example, Jesse. I once had a male student write submit. I say write. It's hard to shake the old language, right? Direct ChatGPT to compose for him a paper, one of the clauses of which started with as a mother, I. This was not a transgender thing. This is a student who did not read his own ChatGPT submitted material. He was not a mother. And of course, confronted, he immediately confessed, because there's no way out of that hole, right? What I'm afraid of, to go back to my earlier point, is a student who's savvy enough to say, hey, ChatGPT, make me sound smart, but not too smart. That's a person that, maybe can't be beaten in the cheating game.
It's funny because when I was reading, I read your paper, obviously, which is how I discovered you. But then in preparation for this podcast, I was reading many other academic papers, and some of the terminology I saw was cheat GPT, which I found to be funny, as well as academic doping. And I've talked about this in a previous podcast, where it's like if you're in pro sports, if everyone else is doping or using steroids, performance enhancing drugs, you kind of have to do it to keep pace with the Joneses. So is there pressure for students to actually keep pace with other students? Like you're saying, it's an arms race. I mean, you could have this dumbest person in class that's just using ChatGPT, getting all these good grades, and then the smartest person in class who's trying to actually learn is not using it and then getting a lesser grade. So then that person is just having less free time. Maybe the other person is working a full-time job, making money, getting straight A's. I mean, there's a lot of other, or just partying, etc. It seems like there's a lot of other, there's a lot of reasons to actually, quote unquote, cheat.
Yeah, I guess it depends on one's opinion on what ChatGPT is currently capable of. I mean, I would say that ChatGPT is doing better work than the stupid student, but worse work than the smart student. And so it's kind of the middling undergrad whose work can be, I guess, somewhat convincingly replaced by the machine slave. I'm less persuaded that students are using ChatGPT to rescue their grades than I am that they're using ChatGPT to give themselves more time, to look at internet pornography and post on Instagram, or work a job, as you said. That's certainly a thing.
What about the teachers? I was actually reading some studies that have come out that said that more professors and teachers use ChatGPT than students. And it's, I'm kind of looking at some data. The data that I saw, which of course, I mean, I don't know if I would believe it or not, but it says that basically 51% of college students report using ChatGPT, 30 to 35% admitted to using it to help write essays, while over 60% of teachers use it to do lesson plans, grading, things like that. And then I was reading an article that was, this one student was upset because she got her homework back, and the assignment had a bunch of ChatGPT prompts that the professor was using to grade this essay. It seems like, like in your experience, are a lot of the professors also using it? So then do we have a situation where you have a student using AI, a professor using AI to grade it? So now we just have AI like bouncing back and forth with actually zero learning being done, as well as zero instruction being provided by the professor.
Yeah, it's the nightmare scenario. The professor uses AI to design the assignment, the student uses AI to complete it, and the professor uses AI to grade it. I've never actually seen that. I've never knowingly seen that happen. I have certainly known a couple of professors who have used AI to facilitate, their course design. Let me use AI to help write an assignment, for example. I disapprove, but I don't disapprove so didactically that I'm going to file a lawsuit over it. But I do think that lawsuits are where we're going. That this will eventually be, decided on by the courts. What is the university promising students when they advertise their faculty on their website, for example? And my guess is that, 15 years from now, the way universities advertise themselves, the way they conduct their business, the way that major corporations feel about university credentials, maybe even the existence of universities as we now know them is going to be so radically changed that it's hard to even anticipate or talk about, because we simply can't yet know how all of this is going to shake out.
You said earlier that you could basically tell 100% of the time when a student was using, either ChatGPT or one or the other. I mean, I'm just using ChatGPT because I think it's probably the most well-known, but there's a lot of other these AI, systems. But how can you tell with 100% certainty if a student is actually using one of these AI tools?
Well, there are certain proclivities. ChatGPT is big on the one hand, on the other hand, argumentation. ChatGPT is hesitant to take a strong side. Whenever I encounter kind of milquetoast, inoffensive, slightly left of center perspective, certainly one that is helped along by fake citations, I know I'm dealing with the robot, but I think in general there's just a kind of wordiness about ChatGPT. It just feels inhuman. It's like the famous line about pornography in the Supreme Court. I know it when I see it. Now, again, I'll be the first to admit that those who know more about this kind of thing than I do, those who have created the machine, will never believe that I catch it. But I would love to sit for one of those old Pepsi versus Coke taste tests and see if I can spot the machine pros. I think I would do very well.
One of the themes of your article, in praise of errors, ChatGPT is scrambling campus values. One of the themes, though, is like you know when you're seeing it, but you also have to prove it. With plagiarism is easy. Like there's different software programs that have it, or you could kind of Google it. But to actually prove it, though, and that was kind of the themes of some of the research I was reading, was it's really actually kind of hard to prove it. And so even if you have a pretty good inclination that this student actually did use ChatGPT, I mean, is there any recourse?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it depends on, at least for the next few years, it depends on the institution. I'll just give a quick example. There is there's an online firm called Grammarly, I think, that used to help students, just by, as Microsoft Word would do, underlining their errors in a little squiggly colored line, right? You upload your papers and they tell you, here are the passages that are problematic. Well, over the last few years, Grammarly has introduced AI components into its offerings so that, if I were to upload a paragraph of almost complete gibberish with like 3 or 4 clicks of the mouse, I could turn it into passable machine prose. So I say all that to say that there was a story online about 3 or 4 months ago that Notre Dame is permitting professors to forbid student use of Grammarly. So this is an example of a major institution that is saying we want to empower our professors to crack down on a particularly insidious and seductive form of AI cheating. That said, I can't imagine it's going to last. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have some institutions trying to hold the line, some institutions doing nothing and saying, professors, you figure it out. And we may or may not stand by you if you assess someone an academic dishonesty penalty, depending on the circumstances. And then you'll have some institutions that say, look, we've got to just incorporate this into what we're doing. We can no longer even assign essays that, that at least on the surface don't allow for computer prose. And of course, different institutions are different, right? So like a public Research One institution with a faculty senate, administrators can't just make a pronouncement about what happens in the classroom. The kind of school that I worked at for 15 years, private, tuition dependent, no faculty union, administrators can do whatever they want, right? And so it just depends on, I think, the institution. But then, of course, there's also the question of the things that professors might currently do to forbid AI in the classroom that might work right now, but in the long run are unsustainable. And I'll give an example. A lot of professors of my acquaintance are saying, look, we're just going to go back to old-fashioned blue books, right? You're going to come into the classroom with just you and a pen, and I'm going to give you this pre-assembled notebook, and you're going to write by hand, what you know, and I'm going to grade you in that way. And I suppose the thinking is that, if it's just them and the page, them and the pen, they can't cheat. Well, wearable tech is, of course, coming along. It's already here. I wonder how, to use a science fiction example, how professors are going to police this when people have little Google AI implants in their brains or whatever, right? So long term, I think the situation favors those who would do the cheating to such an extent that we may even learn not to call it cheating anymore at a certain point.
How big of a deal is cheating, though? I mean, if we want to even call this cheating, is anyways. I mean, most students go to college. They don't go there to learn. They go there to get a degree, aka a credential, so they could get a job. I mean, they're not really there to actually learn. I mean, at least I have 3 college degrees, including a master's, and the vast majority. I mean, I graduated like almost 20 years ago, so it was way before, obviously, this stuff. But even when I was in school, no one was there to learn. They were there to get the degree. The whole the expression C's to get degrees. I mean, you graduate, you get a job. I mean, how much are they? I guess the question is, and then also if they're not using ChatGPT, once they get a real job, maybe they actually will be using ChatGPT. Maybe the students that quote unquote cheated the most are then going to actually be the best prepared, because when you get a real job, it's like being efficient, you know, understanding how to be up to date on tech. I mean, maybe you're actually holding students back by being like, hey, don't use this, use your own quote unquote brain, whatever. But the fact is, when you get a real job, you're using all these tools, you're using different things that are going to augment you anyway. So maybe those students will be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I think we have to make a distinction, though, between students who are like first-generation ChatGPT users who at least learned the rudiments of English prose and communication before ChatGPT came along, and then those kids who are being born today and like in 22 years when they're graduating from college or whatever, you know, some of them will literally know nothing because they will have used the robots at every step of the way. And so, you know, to your earlier question, I agree with you that very few people go to college to learn. But if college only indicates mastery of ChatGPT, I can assure all of our listeners that other cheaper means of demonstrating that mastery will arise. And then what's the point of colleges? I spoke to the former Nebraska senator and University of Florida president Ben Sass at an event recently. And we were talking, he was talking, and I was asking a question about, you know, the story in New York Magazine about AI use at Columbia. And I don't know if you read that article, but, you know, my takeaway is basically that every Columbia student is using AI for every assignment. So that they have more time to protest Israel, which is fine. You know, more power to them. But at that point, what is the point of Columbia? And Sass argued, and I think there's a lot of validity to this, that the point of it is on the admissions end. If you were admitted to Columbia, that is what Columbia can do for you. It can show you that you're the kind of person and show employers that you're the kind of person who is admitted to Columbia. And that's great. But now, why does Eastern Michigan University exist, right? Why does West North Christian Podunk U exist, right? And so that's like most colleges in America are not going to be useful at sorting the way the Ivy League is. So if it is indeed true that what I'm describing as cheating is just an inevitable economic technological development, that's really bad news for colleges, in my opinion.
In preparation for this, I was reading this paper. This paper was called "Do Not Worry That Generative AI May Compromise Human Creativity or Intelligence in the Future. It Already Has" by Professor Robert Sternberg of Cornell. And then in this paper, he basically just says that in either autocracies or corrupt democracies, that schools may suppress critical thinking by promoting propaganda, overemphasizing memorization and testable skills, leading students to lose creativity, not from inability, but from the lack of incentive. And then generative AI will simply finish the job that these schools already began. And I mean, I kind of think that anyways. I mean, like you see all these like women that graduate, like, women are graduating at much higher rates. It's like, yeah, they're just like better at sitting still and like following directions in the classroom. And like, it's interesting because I live in a college town, and there's this business that I frequent fairly regularly, and it's owned by this like 77-year-old female. And we'll have these debates, but she's always talking about how smart these people are that come into school or that come into her shop. And I'm like, well, why are they smart? Like, what makes you think they're so smart? And she's like, well, they're going to university. I'm like, yeah, but what, what attitudes or what do they say? Like, what are their actions that make them so smart? And she's like, well, they wouldn't be in school if they weren't smart. I'm like, but what have they demonstrated? Just because you go to school doesn't mean you're smart. I mean, I got a master's degree. I could be a fucking moron. I mean, like, it does none of this stuff means anything, like, I mean, then like, and I think it's like, oh, so you learn to sit in class, shut the fuck up, kind of parrot a few things, and that makes you a genius. Like, and I do think like this is I just thought it was cool, and then of course we have the negative Flynn, which basically Flynn argues that intelligence improves kind of like over generations, depending on the country. In the 1980s or the early 2000s, we've actually seen a decrease in overall IQ among entire societies. Some people say it has to do with technology. Other people, it could be other things. But what do you think about, I guess, the kind of the couple of points that I just brought up?
The idea that somebody who got into a university is intelligent, on that basis alone cannot stand a 10 seconds long encounter with reality, in my opinion. So, I mean, but that raises another question, which is like, how long can college live off the fat of previous generations? Right now there's still a cachet with university attendance, right? And I think that I don't want to be too hard on colleges, because I know that, I learned a lot at college, and I like to think that I taught a couple of people one or two things in my decade and a half of working at one. But the idea that ChatGPT is just finishing the job, that universities were already crumbling, and that here these chatbots are going to finally destroy them, I think that's probably true. Simply because if I don't necessarily believe this, but if it's the case that the primary economic skill of the future is telling the machine slave what to do, it doesn't make any sense to me that a liberal arts institution, frankly, even a technical institution, is going to be the best indicator or communicator of that skill set.
Graham, as your paper is called In Praise of Errors, basically kind of the gist of your article is that professors are looking for errors because that maybe possibly means that a human wrote it. But then it's kind of funny because I have I went to this Spanish immersion school in Costa Rica for 6 months, and I was like pretty good friends with the principal. She went back for her master's in foreign language education, which I find to be funny because she uses ChatGPT to write her essays. And then I was asking her, I was like, oh, like, do you use ChatGPT? She's like, oh, yeah. She's like, basically, I write it, then I run it through a detection software to see if it says that it's, AI or human. Then she's like, I just kind of write like a few mistakes, kind of get it to trick the system, and then I submit it. So then I thought it was kind of funny because it's like in praise of errors. And then some of the articles I was reading was like, even like A students are thinking like, maybe I'll make a few typos here and there just to like kind of punctuate that I actually wrote it by myself. So like, in praise of errors, like, does errors mean it's a human? Does it mean that the AI is getting smarter? I mean, what does this mean? What does this mean, Graham?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I talked about this earlier. The person who is sophisticated enough to tell ChatGPT to mess it up a little bit will never be caught, and that's fine. My hat's off to that person. And I didn't go into higher ed to become a police detective or whatever. They can do what they want. But in my experience, and maybe I just wasn't working at a good enough school. I mean, it was a fine school, but I certainly didn't knowingly encounter a lot of students who were sophisticated enough to tell ChatGPT to insert some errors to avoid detection. What I saw instead, was when I would catch people using this stuff is people who had ChatGPT write something and then didn't even read it before they submitted it. So for those folks, the absence of errors was indeed, the damning indicator that non-human effort was at stake here. But beyond that, I mean, I just think it's hilarious that for the first decade and a half of my career, I was like, why can't these people write a sentence? And then like overnight, it was like, thank God this guy can't write a sentence. And that kind of reversal feels like it almost has a moral component to it. Like, was I just being a jerk with grading all these years, and now here comes God to undermine my entire hermeneutic of academic assessment?
As an actual English professor, I think that you probably are much closer to this than many other fields or majors, right? So how would this impact other fields, and do you think that it's actually even, say, more sinister or worse, or would you say that it's better? I mean, let's say you're like a STEM major. I mean, are you using chat to do advanced analytics and whatnot, and is that actually even cheating since you already have other like data analytical tools that are, I mean, like if you use a calculator back in the day, it's not like you're citing the calculator, right? And that's kind of like where we're at now, where it's like you're gonna get to the point where everyone's using chat, so you're not actually even having to. So if you're not using chat, like back, if you're not using a calculator, I mean, that's kind of on you. Like, like, oh, I use this calculation and I use my, T3 or whatever we used back in the day, right?
I actually don't know. Do you know, like in a math class, for example, how does Chat GPT differ from a calculator? Does it? I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I think the way that I would, at least, I mean, I haven't been in university school in years, but I would think the difference would be that the Chat GPT would show the work. That was always when I was in school, is like, I don't care if you know the answer. I need to show the work so you know the actual step A to Z, whatever. So Chat GPT will actually give you the full process. So, I mean, it's massively different.
Yeah. Well, I would certainly consider that cheating. If you're told to show the work and you use Chat GPT to show the work, then yeah, I think that's cheating. But in my opinion, the deeper question is, is making students show the work a stupid thing for a professor to do? And if it is, then it should be eliminated by ChatGPT. And if it's not, then there will presumably somewhere down the line, God willing, be some penalty for people who are cheating in that way. I mean, really, these are the kinds of philosophical questions that are raised. Is there any value in a human being knowing how to write a sentence? If there is, then I suspect we'll keep on doing it to some extent. And if there's not, then I guess it's for the best that ChatGPT takes that over. Now, as a political conservative who makes my living writing conservative political commentary, I'll never be replaced by ChatGPT because ChatGPT is way too woke to do what I do. But I think that if like rudimentary or even advanced math is just no longer necessary for the human experience, for human progress or flourishing, then I guess chat can take it over.
So that article that I referenced before, the "Do not worry that generative AI may compromise human creativity or intelligence in the future," it already has. And then he has kind of 5 areas that he finds to be very problematic. One, which is I kind of skipped the first one, but the second one is just you use it or lose it. The brain's like a muscle. If you're not exercising it, you're going to lose it. So this just comes to, are we dumbing down education, or people just being stupider, which also goes into the reverse Flynn effect. Intellectual ownership was his third point, which is that if you plagiarize, students know that they're plagiarizing. They know they're cheating. But if you actually are the one that puts in the prompts, you actually think this is your own work. And so do students actually think that they're like, or just people think they're super smart because they had a few prompts and they got some, great answer out of it? Detectability. Of course, this is this article is talking about in kind of an academic setting, but there's just no tools that are really good at actually telling you if you are using ChatGPT. And like my friend in Costa Rica, if you make a few tweaks and make a few errors, you can kind of fool people. And then the hidden purpose. Who knows what the intentions of generative AI? Like you're talking about how it leans, quite left. There could be a lot of propaganda, things like this, which students don't know. They think it's objective. There's a lot of facts that are made up. So, kind of what the actual message that these students are getting and what they're being leaned towards. What do you think about this professor's kind of assessment on this?
Well, to the last point, I might as well confess up front that I don't believe that true artificial intelligence is possible. I certainly don't think that ChatGPT has intentions or ever will have intentions. I think that much of the way that we talk about it is anthropomorphization, spurred on by people who see a dollar to be made. And so I'm certainly among those who argue that the work of AI is mostly fraudulent hype. But maybe I'm wrong. In which case, and frankly, even if I'm right, I do think that we're going to see a dumbing down of the population, just as we have with the internet and going back a ways the typewriter. But on the other hand, there's a certain democratization of ability and knowledge that isn't without its value. Without question, the average American today is stupider than like Thomas Jefferson, right? But way more people have at least some rudimentary knowledge and learning and education today than they had in Jefferson's age. And I imagine that one day, when the future civilization digs through the ruins and finds this podcast, they're going to say, man, that Hillard was a genius. No, I'm just a regular person, who had a regular education of my time. And I suspect that not my children, if I can do anything about it, but my grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be shockingly stupid by our standards. But the learning that does exist will be more broadly distributed. And that's not nothing. So I do think that there's something to the idea that Chet is going to dumb us down. But I think maybe there's a little bit of a silver lining there. I will say, though, that somebody needs to know how to do something just to check the machine's work. And so that'll keep at least 2 or 3 colleges in business.
I guess to your first point, talking about the people's kind of view of ChatGPT or AI being actual AI instead of just like big data and these large language models. I mean, I've done numerous podcasts on AI's bullshit, so to speak. So I agree with that. But I guess my larger point is that all this data is being scraped from the internet. So a lot of it leans heavily left. And so if there's really no neutral, and I mean, it took me, I mean, I'm 43 and my wife's a year older than me, or fiance is a year older than me. And she lived in LA for like 18 years. She lived in Venice Beach. But basically, like, you kind of think like all this stuff when you're younger is neutral. And then you realize when you get older, like, it's so heavily slanted to the left. And I think you're like a lot of these people, like you're mentioning, like these kids protesting for Hamas or whatever. Of course, they just don't know any better. This is like these professors are teaching them this stuff. This is the stuff that they know. It's kind of like the willful ignorance or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's not only a right of center concern that ChatGPT is basically locking in place forever the conventional wisdom of the Biden Democratic Party. Like, do communists of the future not want to be able to compose content, right? I mean, I suspect, I haven't asked ChatGPT this, but I suspect if we ask ChatGPT about communism, it would probably tell us some hard truths, right? But God forbid, there may be some future where that kind of truth telling is no longer acceptable or desirable. So I think on the far left as well as on the center and far right, it's kind of obnoxious and will be obnoxious going forward that ChatGPT is just like forever stuck in the center left and is totally inflexible in that perspective, at least in my experience using it.
So as someone that was working with these students and whatnot, what do you think's the future though of university and AI? Like, if you had parents that came up to you, it's like, hey, I got a senior in college. I mean, do you recommend going to university? Do you recommend going to a trade school? You recommend not going to any of these institutions of higher learning, or do you recommend maybe a certain specific major? Do you see AI actually impacting massive careers? Has your career been impacted by it? How would you answer any of these questions if you have this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I have kids who are I have a daughter who's about to enter high school and a son who's about to enter seventh grade. So I'm already thinking about these things. What are the AI proof careers for the future? Or maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it. What is the AI training that they need now to be positioned for whatever that future is? I guess I tend to think that like the internet, artificial intelligence is going to produce career tracks that we can't even imagine. I asked my dad this the other day. I said, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, did you imagine that I was going to be the editor of an internet-based academic policy think tank? And of course, the answer is no, because what even is that? What even was that in like 1989, right? So my guess is that my kids will do some work that I don't even know about yet. And maybe ChatGPT will have something to do with that. I hope not, because I find it to be obnoxious. But then again, I find the whole internet to be obnoxious and wish it had never been invented. So one thing I will note to your other question is, in my experience, nearly everyone, maybe everyone who says, college is overblown, fewer kids should go to college, nevertheless intends to send his or her own kids to college. So that tells us something. I mean, I think the project still has value. And of course, as mentioned, I work for a higher ed reform organization. I know college's problems as well as anyone, but I still intend to send my kids to college if they have any inclination to go. I'm not sure if that's the right move financially or career-wise. Maybe I'm wrong, but I tend to think that at least for the next generation, things are going to remain essentially as they are. In the long term, I do worry about college's economic viability as employers begin to learn that there's basically no distinction between college graduates and non-graduates. And that's, I think, where ChatGPT is the most insidious from universities' perspective. Basically, just erasing the line between those who have been to college and those who haven't, as far as skills and even perceived intelligence is concerned.
I guess it just depends. You hear all these people want to send their kids to college, but back in the day, it didn't really matter what major you had, as long as you had the degree. And university was pretty cheap. I remember my first semester of university in the early 2000s was $900 a semester, and I mean, I have no idea what that university is now, but I would imagine it's significantly higher. And then, of course, like the average student takes 5.5 years to graduate with a bachelor's degree. They'll have these universities where they only offer a certain class, X semester. That's a requirement. So they just kind of like prolong your time in university. And a lot of the white collar jobs that you go to university for are easier to automate than, say, the plumber, the electrician. But I think also, like, it's more of like an image thing. Like, oh, you don't want to be the plumber. You'd rather be, I don't know, some accountant or whatever. But unless you're like some accountant working in some tax haven for the super rich or whatever, the plumber's making well over $100 an hour, making more than you are, and they have job security. Like, a plumber's not being automated anytime soon. I mean, I hear people that are like, oh yeah, they can automate the plumber. It's like, okay, so you're going to have a plumber that's a robot plumber that's going to be super heavy. Maybe it like falls through someone's it's on a second floor, falls through the floor. I mean, or like the thing runs out of juice or whatever. I mean, like, there's so many different things that could, like, we're so far away from having the actual robot plumber come to your house anytime soon. What if the thing just like runs out of juice and accidentally like touches a baby or something and the baby's squashed? I mean, there'd be all sorts of issues that are going on. None of these things are being replaced. Like, these actual blue collar jobs are being replaced anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I guess one could argue that if we all yell, be a plumber, learn a trade long enough, and kids start paying attention, that we'll eventually have an oversupply in those fields. And I suppose in that way the pendulum will swing. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely think if somebody said to me, like, what, and let's take my kids out of it. Let's take the emotion out of it, right? If a stranger said to me, what should I tell my 18-year-old to do? Well, we're looking at a future in which nobody has children, and in which machines take over a lot of jobs, but in which, nevertheless, there are some human services that will either never be automated or will be the last to be automated. So I would say be a nurse or be a veterinarian, and you'll probably make it through your working life, in my opinion. Be a nurse for geriatric patients, especially, and you'll be set.
What is it right now? Something around 20% of the U.S. population is about 65 or older, and then every year, as the fertility rate drops, the percentage of the elderly actually increases. But then, of course, you wonder, like, how many people are getting any fulfillment in those jobs, and people have less money as they get older. I mean, are the wages going to decrease and it becomes less desirable? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of there's a lot of factors to anything,
Yeah, and that raises another question, I think, which is, in this future that people who own stock in artificial intelligence companies keep talking about, in this future, are people still allowed to vote? Because if we're still a democracy, I can't imagine that the populace is going to allow a dispensation in which like all the jobs are gone. And I certainly don't think. I mean, the part of this is just my own philosophical and religious perspective, but I certainly don't think that you can replace meaningful human labor or even meaningless human labor with universal basic income without suffering any kind of psychic loss. I just think we're made for were made for work and to the extent possible for meaningful work. Yeah. So I guess I can't help but think that artificial intelligence is more of a nuisance than anything else. I'm certainly a pessimist in that sense, but to go back, I mentioned earlier the Ben Sass talk that I went to recently here in Nashville. He said that in 15 years or whatever, we would have robots making other robots at prices that are too cheap to meter. I just think that's self-evidently stupid and absurd. So I persist in believing that there will be work for people to do in the future.
I've done a lot of podcasts on kind of the AI hype, and I mean, ChatGPT of the last 30 years, well, I guess not 30 years, but, really since the iPhone came out, which the iPhone came out in 2007. And then, once you kind of had version 3, version 4, the apps and things like that, so say 2010, 2011, really hasn't been a whole lot of innovation. I mean, innovation takes decades. I mean, like, I really don't expect in 10 years from now, I really don't expect a whole lot, difference. There's a whole lot different stuff going on. I mean, I remember I had Jeffrey Funk on, or Professor Jeffrey Funk, in the last podcast, and he had a book talking about the AI hype bubble, and he's talking about like, all these people talk about like these medications that AI is going to create, and it's like the actual coming up with the compounds is not the hardest part. Or I shouldn't say the hardest part, but it's the cheapest part. You still have to run clinical trials, which cost billions of dollars. It takes years, and then they've actually found out that a lot of these compounds and combinations that the AIs come up with just have already come out, or some of them are already patented and they just weren't effective. So then you still have to like run this stuff through like these patent programs and whatnot. So like, it's just a lot of the promises that they think we're going to have are decades away, like it's just, I mean, I guess I'm jaded, but I'm 43. I grew up in the 90s with the internet and a computer. I really don't think 2025 is a whole lot different. I mean, hell, the first, my dad had a cell phone in the 90s, like it wasn't like, it's not a whole lot different. I mean, the first the first smartphone came out in 1994, the IBM Simon, which actually had a touch screen and it had some applications on it. I mean, they had apps in the 90s. I mean, the first app on a computer was in the 1970s, which was basically a precursor to the Excel spreadsheet. Then, of course, you also had kind of a word processor. This is, before Word on Microsoft. But I mean, you go back to the 70s, it's 50 years ago. I mean, now we have, it looks better. We got better graphics, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not that impressed. I guess I don't foresee a whole lot. I mean, hopefully I'm wrong. I would love to see some Jetson, futuristic type place to live, but I can't imagine that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think my destiny is to live in a dissident Flintstones community within the world of the Jetsons. But I'm glad you mentioned the AI struggles to come up with novel medical compounds. I mean, I'm reminded of, I'm sure you've read these stories, these lawyers who keep citing non-existent case law, in their briefs and getting dinged by judges. I mean, in my opinion, that should be just automatic disbarment. And I know that we're just not ever going to go that path as a society, but like there has to be a penalty for outsourcing your work to AI. And I'm not talking about the university level. I'm talking about the professional America, right? Outsourcing your work to AI, getting back gibberish or false data or something harmful, God forbid, and then not checking and just presenting it. And, this is one of those instances where I'm just grateful again that we're a litigious nation, because some of this is going to be corrected in the courts. When AI replaces my doctor and then kills me, do my descendants now own the AI company? Like, is the lawsuit going to be, because at a certain point, there is going to be some human accountability. And I think the AI hype master would say, well, in the future, AI won't make these mistakes. Well, I guess we'll see. I think it will.
I haven't actually gone to the doctor in like over a decade. Anytime I have an issue, I just type the symptoms into chat, and I feel like it's actually probably better. I mean, let's not forget that half the doctors finished in the bottom half of their class. And most doctors I've beat people out that are doctors, and you're like, man, this person is not that bright. And then you find out they're a medical doctor, and you're like, oh my God, like I would never trust you with any diagnosis. And like that, I mean, like if you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, I mean, you're not going to the local hospital. I mean, you have like the best of the best doctors, but the average person, I think I would trust AI medical doctor over the typical average doctor out there.
But the AI doctor doesn't have malpractice insurance. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, maybe it will in the future. Now that there is a growth industry for our future economy and progress, right? Designing malpractice insurance for the machines. I don't want to pry, but how do you get prescription medication if you're outsourcing your diagnoses to Google or whatever?
I just don't get prescription medication. I mean, I haven't had like, I mean, I haven't got anything, like I said, I had my wife or fiance had some stomach issues, activated charcoal, knocked it out. Actually, it was funny because, activated charcoal is on the WHO's list of essential medications. My business partner, his wife, who's from Chile, was back in Chile. She had this stomach issue. Her doctor actually gave her activated charcoal. And then like a couple of weeks later, when he was back in the U.S., his brother-in-law's wife, no, his wife-in-law, she had a stomach issue. Had to get a colonoscopy, all this stuff. She asked the doctor about activated charcoal, and the doctor's like, "Oh no, that's outdated. Like we don't use that anymore." So then he's like, "Well, just take it. Like there's no side effects." And she refused to take it because the doctor was like, "Oh no, that's outdated. Like my doctor said don't take it." Mm-hmm. But I mean, I guess I've never really would I want like some AI to give me surgery or something? Obviously not. I wouldn't trust that. Like I said, it goes back to like the plumber. But if it's just like a general, like a GP type visit where you're just kind of putting in your symptoms, I would trust the AI more than I would trust an actual doctor.
There's that movie Prometheus from maybe 10 years ago. Did you ever see that picture with the automated surgery machine on the spaceship?
No, I've never seen that movie.
It's an iconic scene. There's this basically AI powered surgery device that you crawl into and you tell it what procedure you want and it does it. Now, in the case of that movie, the procedure is cut this alien out of me before it explodes through my stomach. But, my sense is actually the opposite of what you said, that in the future, it will be the machines doing the surgery and the human doctor making the treatment decision. Simply because, presumably the AI surgeons, the machine surgeon's hand doesn't slip, right? I don't know. I'm not going to be signing up for robot surgery. I'd literally rather die. But then again, it's easy to say that when one's healthy. Maybe I'll change my tune if I need the surgery that only the robot can provide.
When you were a professor, what is like the students' kind of perspective? Like their perspective or their view, like are students afraid that they're going to graduate? Like, if you, like this freshmen or sophomores you had, are they afraid that they're going to graduate and then there's not going to be jobs out there, or that it's going to already be outsourced, or what's their actual kind of feeling with AI?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was an English professor, so my students were worried that there weren't going to be jobs for them back in 2007 when my career started. And I haven't been in a classroom full time since AI came about, but as I said, I still teach the occasional class. I know, like maybe 2 semesters ago, I taught a creative writing workshop, and we talked about AI. I said, look, if you think that in the future novels are going to be written by machines, this is probably not the class for you. But if you think that human readers are going to be able to tell the difference between machine and human generated prose and demand human generated prose, let's get to work. And whether we're right or wrong, we all agreed that there is a difference, that people will be able to tell the difference, and that human generated work would still have the lion's share of the market. I mean, now that raises all kinds of questions about art. I mean, I would argue that a robot, by definition, cannot make art, and that whatever the robot has made is not art. And in fact, I'm quite hesitant to even use the word "made" or "make" about a robot. I mean, let's not forget that ChatGPT is not writing in any real sense of the word. It's just making mostly really good predictions about what word ought to come next. I read and reviewed a book recently in which the author insisted that we should be using the phrase syntax generation technology. And I think there's a lot of truth to that we are, even those of us who are mindful that we ought not to be doing this, we just cannot help anthropomorphizing these stupid robots. It's not writing. It doesn't have any intelligence or plan or comprehension or perspective. Now that doesn't mean that we won't come to regret its conception and what it may one day do to us, but it certainly won't do it to us as a kind of outspringing of a evil will or whatever. So, yeah, to get back to your original question, I mean, I've talked to relatively few students about this, but my sense, just from the ones I have talked to, is that they're not particularly concerned about it. Maybe naively, I don't know.
Well, you also said that you have 2 children, so I mean, I imagine you're also out, hanging out with some of your friends that have kids as well, or maybe some of your children's parents, friends, whatnot. I mean, what do they have these conversations? Like, oh, I can't be sending Betty to get this major because it's going to be obsolete, or I mean, or do you not? Do those friends of yours not have that conversation?
I'm actually surrounded by techno optimists, which makes me feel like the turd in the punch bowl. But I mean, I do think that's how, among people who have the leisure and capacity to think seriously about this, that's how it typically breaks down, right? There are those who say, well, this is great. Most work is drudgery. And if it replaces most work, then all we have to worry about is like how to keep people from starving to death in the absence of paying jobs. And that's, of course, where universal basic income comes in. And then, I have maybe a few other friends who think, well, we're going to get everything except for the universal basic income. So there's going to be a lot of extreme poverty. I tend not to think that's true, simply because, as mentioned earlier, in all of these scenarios, we're presumably still voting from time to time. And I can't imagine that a future in which 75% of the populace is starving to death on the street is going to endure democratically. And then there are those who, like me, think that it's all overblown, and basically nothing is going to change except that a few industries like higher education that probably deserve to be seriously reformed or outright killed may take a hit.
It's interesting because if you ever read Robert Gordon's book, the Rise and Fall of American Growth, but he basically claims that kind of like productivity stopped in like the 1970s, has been stagnant, of course, which is why wages have been stagnant. And then there's kind of like a one blip, which is kind of like the 90s, where you had the internet, but that growth wasn't as big as people think it was. And like in my experience, at least since I've been around, is that they always talk about how these technologies make you more efficient, but then it just seems like you have like duplicate work. Like I work at jobs where it's like you still have to do the paper copy. Maybe it's like legally, or you have some type of regulation where you have to have the paper copy, but then you also have to go in and put it into the computer. So you have to have a digital copy. So like the digital copy never really replaced the actual physical copy. And then like my fiance, where she's a like management, and then she has like all these HR tools that she has to use, where she, that the HR department gives her. So she has to like do these peer reviewed, various like peer reviews of different coworkers. Never really peers. I mean, they could be above you or below you, but this is like pretty routine to get like these metrics because they want to get data, what people think. And there's all these other like quote unquote like tools that she has to use. I personally think it's just a bunch of VCs trying to make money, because like ultimately like it's not even actually contributing to productivity. It's just like shit that she has to do. And then of course she's salaried, so it's not even like she's getting paid for this. And then of course she like puts all this stuff off because it's like not actually essential to the job. But then if you don't do it, you kind of get like in trouble. But it's like, in my experience, a lot of these tools don't actually even make you more productive. Like you might have one tool that saves you time, but then you have 3 extra tools that you have to use in order, that the work requires you to use, that are just time consuming to document something, because the company wants to essentially get more data on you so they could tell this to investors or to the board, or put it in their their earnings report or something.
Yeah, there's 2 really interesting threads there. On the one hand, you would think that like as a writer, I can get more done because I don't have to go out in the morning and like make my own paper or whatever. And that is true, but I just take on more work, right? And I'm sure everybody in whatever his or her industry is can tell a similar story. But I think maybe the even more interesting point that arises from what you just mentioned is that like the regulatory landscape is going to help us preserve the 40-hour work week. Like, well, AI could have saved me all this time, but here comes the latest Dear Colleague letter from the Secretary of Education, and I've got to do X, Y, and Z, where I used to do A, B, and C. So, I'm a critique of, the deep state and overregulation. I'm a critic of those things, I should say, but maybe that'll be what saves us from obsolescence.
Yeah, it certainly is probably a pretty good, one of the higher reasons that would save us, I would think, is that right there.
And that would just be, this is, go back to writing. That's a kind of irony that a machine could never come up with. Come on, this is why we're still going to have, I think, human creativity out there. The idea that our ridiculous form of government is going to be what spares us from, having to go stand in bread lines.
I mean, are you still friends with some professors that you used to have as colleagues, and do they ever air concerns, or what's their kind of thesis?
Yeah, I've never heard the kind of longer or even medium term concerns like, hey, are we educating people for jobs that don't exist anymore? Because as mentioned, this was a liberal arts field to begin with, and so we've never been in the English department directly preparing people for a particular career the way they are in like the accounting program. But on the other hand, I think if I'm remembering my reading correctly, accounting may be one of the first casualties of the AI revolution. So I still think, and I think my former colleagues think that, the broadly educated, urbane, wise, communicative English major still has a chance in the digital economy of tomorrow, whatever it turns out to be. That said, these former colleagues you mentioned, they are absolutely in the front lines of how do we get them to stop cheating on every single assignment we give. And so, at least as I understand it, those are the questions right now. You know, how can we stop students from using ChatGPT on every assignment? If we catch them, is the administration going to back us up? How long before they make us uh, begin explicitly permitting it? Is it the right thing to oppose it in the first place? You know, and then as I said earlier, you know, how long are some of these kind of old-fashioned fixes like blue books or, you know, handwritten exams? How long are they going to be? I guess effective in stopping this kind of thing. Easy to say, you know, turn off your phone. Even easy to say, I think in some circumstances, okay, put your phone in this little pouch. I'm going to collect them all up. Harder to say, okay, also take off your watch, take off your glasses, take off whatever your earpiece thing is, and take out the chip that's been embedded in your brain. Right. That's probably where professors just give up and lay down their arms in the battle against AI cheating.
As we mentioned earlier, that a lot of the students are there to get the credential. They don't really care about the learning. But at the same time, a lot of the professors are there to get a paycheck, to get a job. So, I mean, how many of them actually even care anyways, I guess. And then, I mean, how many of the professors actually just love it? Because it's like, man, I just graded 500 papers in 6 minutes. Now I can go out, you know, and hang out on my, you know, my pontoon boat or something on, you know, over the weekend and drink some wine and not have to worry about all these papers I have to grade. And then secondly, like, you know, the customer is always right. Aren't students the customer? I mean, if they all want to cheat, I mean, what are you going to do? Kick out if every student's doing it and you crack down on it, you essentially like tell all your customer base, like, hey, like, we don't, you know, like, it seems like there's this, I mean, that's the whole reason. Like, it's just funny, like, you go to a university in like the US versus a university in like Europe. I mean, the US has like lazy rivers and these like, you know, sprawling campuses with all these amenities, and then you go to other countries in Europe and they don't. They're just like pretty simple, basic facilities, which is why they're, you know, their tuition in a lot of cases is free. Like the overhead, and especially like the admin overhead, is significantly lower. So it's like, if you're a university, you can't even tell these students to go fuck off, because that's like, the customer is always right. I guess, I don't know, I kind of see it like, if I was a professor, I think I would just accept it and spend more time on my pontoon boat, you know, is what I would do.
Well, you know, the students are the customers in the sense that students are who colleges are marketing to. But I think we can make a strong case that, in fact, the federal government and state governments are the customer. They're certainly the largest single payee for university tuition expenses. As you know, almost all student loans and grants are now backed by the federal government. So I think one could make the case that the true customer of the university is the society that needs tomorrow's citizens and yes, consumers and workers to be created. To your other point, though, I mean, I remember reading in like 2010. I mean, this is seriously like 15, 16 years ago. This prediction, it was probably in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the trade publication for higher ed. Somebody had written that, you know, once computers began grading assignments, that would free professors up for other tasks. And I will never forget that phrase as long as I live, because I instantly thought to myself, well, you know, is waiting in the bread line, is waiting in the unemployment line that other task? Because once administrators realize that the labor of a professor takes way less time than it used to, they're going to hire way fewer professors. So yeah, there may be a generation that gets to sit on the pontoon boat for a few years, but I think in the long run, professors who rely on ChatGPT, who outsource their own expertise, are making themselves eminently fireable. And it doesn't always have to be firing. I mean, as you know, tenure still is operative in many places. But when a tenured professor retires, there's still going to be an administrator deciding whether that faculty line gets renewed or not. So I think in the long run, it's in professors' interests not to appear to have outsourced all of their labor to a machine.
You said that you taught over the pandemic at the university level. And I mean, kind of how was that transition? And I find this to be interesting since I mentioned I live in a university town, and we're in 2025. We're in basically June 2025, and I said I'm out and about. I talk to a lot of the university students, and I'll be talking to these students, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, like I have like I have 5 classes this semester, and 4 of them are online." It's like, okay, so one, why are you paying? Like, I'm like, are you getting a reduction in your tuition? Oh, of course not, But it's like, so first off, why are you paying full tuition? And then secondly, to your kind of point, how would you even be able to prove that these students weren't cheating if everything is done online? I mean, like, it would be really like, of course, I mean, we're at the point now, I think, at least in my experience, like they're not getting an education. They're just essentially paying for a credential. Do we get to the point where it's just like, here, give us $60,000 and we'll give you a degree? I mean, are we getting to that point?
I think with online learning, we're already there, but I'm a little more cynical about online teaching and learning than perhaps some of my colleagues are. I still insist, both from my experience as a student and as a professor, that in the face-to-face classroom, even for students who maybe don't care anything about learning and who just want the credential, learning is nevertheless taking place. I see the occasional growth in online classes, or have seen it, but I certainly think it's harder, simply because there isn't that shared spontaneous moment. So many of these online classes now are asynchronous. So I program the lesson at 7 a.m. and student A completes it at 9 a.m. and student B at 3 p.m. and student, D at 11:50 p.m. or whatever. And it's, well, that better be a pretty well designed assignment, because there isn't going to be any kind of overlap, right? There's not going to be any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Synergy. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's I guess you would call it a systemic hurdle to learning when the class is being offered on the internet.
I mean, you said you have a lot of friends that like it. It's like, yeah, if you're the professor, it's great. You don't even have to show up, right? A lot of times you just basically put a video up, or put some blueprint, some template together, and then as you're sitting on your hell, with the internet nowadays, you might have Starlink. You have Starlink while you're on your pontoon boat, drinking your wine, uploading your lesson plan. I mean, why would you want to give that up? And you're still making the same amount of money. I mean, that you'd be crazy to give it up. Of course, just like during the pandemic, who was the biggest proponent of like keeping the schools closed? It was the teachers union, because the teachers didn't want to show up. I mean, why would you want to show up after you're just sitting at home in your pajamas on your pontoon boat drinking wine?
Well, but most college classes now are taught by non-tenured adjunct instructors, and that's certainly the case for most online courses. And what's the going rate for an online credit hour of teaching? I bet it's like $700 nationally. So let's say I'm teaching a 3 credit hour English composition class, and I'm making $2,000. Well, I've got to teach, I don't know, 40 of those classes every year to have a decent kind of middle class life in certain locales in America. Certainly not Nashville. I'm going to need more like 80 of those classes. And whether I'm on the pontoon boat or not, I better go easy on the wine, because that's a lot of classes to teach.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole adjunct professor thing is just a big scam. I mean, the tenure. I actually had I had Nicholas Dirks on, who was the former chancellor at Berkeley, and he wrote a book kind of like critiquing higher education. But basically, you get like a lot of these tenure professors that are like in their 70s or 80s, don't even teach classes anymore, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even in certain cases making over $1 million a year. And then you have the adjuncts basically living on, kind of like, subsistence or poverty wages, actually doing all the work. It seems like they really need to overhaul the whole like tenure system. I mean, I had Dr. Marion Nessel on, who is like a big originator of the original food pyramid, and she taught it. I think it was like she taught at some school in New York City, maybe it was NYU or something. And she basically said like she was like 88 and the university like had to buy her out. Thinking like outside of like politics, name another profession, where you have politicians that like die in the, the Senate chamber or whatnot. Like outside of politicians, name another profession where like they have to like basically like buy you out to leave. Most people can't wait to retire. I mean, there's a whole problem with like the tenure system where you have a person making $900,000 a year who doesn't even show up to class. Maybe it shows up, one class a semester or something. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I think that higher ed is particularly susceptible to the kind of disruption that ChatGPT may end up providing, because it's just such a broken industry, and as you've suggested, it's like the Soviet Union. There's just all these internal contradictions, right? And also they've made themselves totally unsympathetic to more and more Americans. So, I'll mention again, like that article in New York Magazine about Columbia University, where you read that, and even if a person who was in no way ideological were to read that article, their takeaway is like, these are all a bunch of terrorist-loving cheaters who do literally nothing all day. Why am I like paying taxes to cover their loans? Like, why is this institution tax exempt? If Columbia, and I mean, I don't want to pick on them because I think that they're, no more guilty than a lot of these schools, but, if Columbia were just a little more reasonable, maybe there would be some political movement to stand up and say, hey, let's maybe not dispense with our higher ed sector. But as it stands now, like obviously Republicans, and I think some independents and Democrats as well, are like, hey, they made their bed, let them lie in it. We just cannot have people who, to your point, make $900,000 a year and teach like 2 classes a semester or whatever. Or, I'll give you an example. I went to graduate school at NYU, and my thesis advisor, like my main professor, did not live in New York City. And I don't mean she lived in Hackensack. I mean, she lived abroad. Right. And this was before online education. So she'd come into the country like 1 semester out of 4. It's like, this is unsustainable as a serious industry in the American economy. And, history and experience show us that if something's unsustainable, and especially so in an age of widespread technological disruption, somebody's going to find a way to do it more cheaply.
I used to personal train in Denver when I was in my 20s, and I had this client that was a college professor. I forget at what university, but it was somewhere in Texas. And so he lived in Denver. Then he'd fly out once a week to teach his class, and then he had like I think he had 1 class and like a lab or something, but it was like 2 days in a row. So he had an apartment that he kept in Texas, had a house in Denver, flew out, and then we would fly back. And I'm just like what, how much money are you making? Like obviously you can hire a personal trainer. You got a apartment in Texas. You have a house in Denver. And like, people are always like, these people are always like, oh, like we're public servants, like we're just like giving up our time. And you're just like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, come on. Like that's like, I wouldn't say, C-suite level cash, but it's significantly more than the average person would think. And then I was like, thinking like, oh, maybe he's like a business professor or some like high level thing. He was like a sociology professor. Like, I'm like, a sociology professor? Like, it's not even a real degree,
Well, we joked earlier about the idea that university admittees are necessarily intelligent, being unable to survive contact with reality. I think that goes double for the idea that university professors are public servants. Give me a break. That is utterly absurd, and I cannot believe that even the most idealistic university professor would, without irony, self-apply that title unless there was something to gain by it.
Today's guest has been Graham Hillard, who is a writer, a former university English professor, and currently is the editor at the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. And he also is a contributing writer at the Washington Examiner. So, Graham Hillard, there's two final questions for you. One, where can people get a hold of your writings, and where can they find you at your primary job, that kind of information? And then secondly, leave us with a final thought to wrap up this podcast, a concluding thought.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me on today. It's been a lot of fun. Subscribe to the Washington Examiner. If you're interested in my political commentary and primarily my film and television reviews, it's a terrific little magazine, and you can find me there in print and online. The Martin Center's website is www.jamesgmartin.center. And of course, I write for them and edit all of our website commentaries. So find us online. As far as a closing thought is concerned, I persist in saying that this AI stuff is probably hyped, overblown a little bit. But man, if any institution, if any sector of the economy is gearing up to be experiencing some pain, it's higher education.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.